Hi, my name is Claudio. I decided to create this video because I started doing yoga about 1.5 years ago, and I've been doing it for about 2 hours a day. And I'm doing it because of all the benefits associated with yoga, the health benefits, mind-body benefits, the physical stretching, muscle toning aspects of it, as well as the physiological benefits in terms of boosting immunity, improving mood, reducing anxiety, reducing depression, etc. And so I've been doing it 2 hours a day, and what I noticed was in the beginning, I was feeling all the positive effects of yoga. However, over time, I noticed that it started hurting my knees. And I've been pretty active throughout most of my life, not an extreme athlete, but, fairly athletic. And my knees are fairly beaten up over the years. But they weren't so bad. I was able to jog and things like that. However, when I started doing yoga, after a few months, my knees started killing me. I had difficulty even walking to some extent. And so I did do some research. I did some searching on the internet for tips, modifications, whatever that would make yoga easier on my knees. However, the tips that I found weren't that helpful ultimately. So I decided to come up with my own modifications. And the main modification that I came up with involves the use of this prop here, which is ultimately a bench. And I couldn't find a bench online, a piece of furniture, that would satisfy the dimensions and things that I was looking for. So at Home Depot, I found this this plastic storage container with the right dimensions. It's about maybe 16, 17 inches high. I put some wood planks on top of it because the lid of this container is flexible, and so I needed something rigid. You could jury rig something yourself if you wanted to, or maybe you could build a bench out of wood or buy a piece of furniture that you might be able to find that matches the dimensions. Yet I'm 5'9", so 16, 17 inches suits me. And then I have this 1/2 inch small yoga mat on top of it to provide some cushioning. And so this is basically the main workaround that I came modification in terms of allowing me to do yoga without harming and destroying my knees. So basically any pose, and in terms of the poses that were the most problematic for my knees, it's any pose where you have to basically be kneeling, where your knees are on the ground. And to a secondary extent, poses that involved extreme flexion of the knee, where you go well below 90 degrees, where you flex it, like really your heel, gets very close to your butt. But the main problem really was kneeling down on my knees. I guess by definition, kneeling means on your knees. The poses that anybody who does yoga is going to be familiar with that involve the knee. Some of the most common ones are hands and knees, cat and cow that you do on your hands and knees, lunges, low lunges you do on your hands and knees, and various others. I'll kind of go through them as I throughout this video. But basically, instead of doing the poses on my hands and knees, I do them standing up and bent over with my hands on this bench. So this is basically the equivalent of a hands and knees pose. And so I could do cat pose here. I could do, let me see, this is cow pose, cat pose. You could do other poses where, again, normally on your hands and knees, you would do these poses like, I believe this one's called balancing cat, where you're on one arm, one hand, and one in the opposite knee, and you extend your one arm out and one leg back. So this one here, and then the other one that's very similar. I think this one's called Balancing Tiger, where again, you're on opposite knee and opposite hand, and you're grabbing the opposite foot with your other hand, your free hand, and you could, tilt your head up if you want, I guess, lift your back up. So these two poses I do standing up, and balancing cat, it can be done this way, and balancing tiger can be done this way, right? The other pose that you do on your knees is half splits. And again, I'm also extremely non-flexible, so this is the best that I can do in terms of a half splits. It's basically kind of a hamstring stretch on one knee, and this one here really, because you're on one knee, this one here really does a number on your knee, because you got all the weight of your body just on one knee as opposed to distributed across two knees. So this one here, I simply do like this. Quad stretch, another one that you do on your knee is a quad stretch, which you could, I've seen done like this, or it could be done with the opposite. The opposite hand grabs the opposite knee, the opposite leg. So again, these here, not only on your knee, but you're also flexing your knee. So this one here is also, probably worse than some of the others. At least I feel it the most, my kneecap especially. So this one here, I'll tend to do. Let me see. I guess I could do it you could do it like this if you're grabbing your leg on the same side as your arm, or if you want to do opposite side, you can do it like this. So that's the quad stretch. There's gate pose, which normally, remember gate pose, I think it's something like this. Leg is out, and you'll do this kind of motion. You're on, again, one knee and one leg is out, but again, lacking flexibility, I can't keep this leg straight. So you bend over like this. So instead of doing it on my knee, this one here, I'll tend to squat down on the leg that would normally be that I'd be using to be on my knee with if I were on the floor, and I'll just bring this other leg out like this, and I'll have to squat down quite a bit on this other leg, on the support leg, and you stand up and you could do a gate pose. Just thread the needle, which on your knee you would do something like this, or maybe to see more clearly, like this. Again, instead of that, you can do thread the needle this way, simply by, it obviously doesn't achieve the same exact effect, but it's similar. So you're just standing up and you just bring one arm through one way and then the other arm through the other way. Now, the other thing that you could do with this prop, which again isn't necessarily to preserve your knees, but it's simply a way to make some of the more challenging poses a little less challenging. And the other aspect to it is, if you're already up, you're standing up and using this prop, one of the downsides of this prop is that now moving from pose to pose, for example, moving from a pose where you would normally be on your hands and knees to like a plank or a cobra pose, now becomes, less smooth of a transition. So, because now you're standing up here, then you have to move down onto the mat and get down on the mat and do a plank pose or move into a downward dog. So what I tend to do in order to minimize these sort of big transitions and try to keep things smooth when I'm moving from pose to pose, I'll tend to do poses that normally don't involve your knees on the bench also. So for example, the plank pose, you could do the plank pose on the bench. And one of the other advantages of this is that it's actually easier. It's less physically demanding to do a plank with on an incline like this than it is on the ground. So this is, if you're looking for that sort of thing, this is good for that. You could also do a side plank on the bench. So again, you're inclined on the side plank, so it's basically easier. Less pressure, less force on your arm and wrist. Downward dog you could do here, because again, you're transitioning a lot. Sometimes, you'll do yoga sequences where you're transitioning between hands and knees and downward dog. So again, if you're doing hands and knees up on the bench like this, to go to downward dog, you'd have to move down here and do this and move back up. So that gets kind of choppy. So here, you could do kind of a downward dog here as well. It's a little bit different. And the point, at least for me, this actually is much easier because I don't have the flexibility to do a proper downward dog. And I don't know if you notice, this thing is moving a little bit. So normally I would use like a sticky mat underneath it, because this is plastic, depending upon what you're using, to prevent this from sliding around. Actually, a small yoga mat would work. This particular mat isn't that sticky. So if we go back to the lunge type poses, the ones where one knee is on the ground. So instead of doing that type of pose, well, actually, this type of pose, I simply do with my leg off the ground, which is basically a normal yoga type pose. And anytime there's a pose where the knee is on the ground, I just simply lift it off the ground. And so this is a little bit more challenging physically, but again, you'll work into it, and if and at least for me, it's worth it. And and I gradually over time built up the stamina to be able to do this fairly easily, because I wanted to preserve my knees. So you could just simply do these kinds of poses, with your leg off the ground. And so another kind of pose that you'll tend to do with, in yoga is with your knee on the ground, and you'll do this side twist like this. So again, I just simply do that with my knee off the ground. Again, this is a little bit more challenging to do it this way, but you can do it that way. Again, just to show you, make sure you got the image here. But this again is a standard type of yoga pose. So I just simply do all poses where I have to do this side twist with my knee off the ground. I never do it with the knee on the ground. The other thing you can do, instead of, if you're just doing a standard, lunge without a twist, the other thing that in your upright, so if you're not on blocks, just lifting the knee off the ground isn't that easy. So if you're doing a lunge type pose like this, and you're upright, I simply do the crescent pose instead of that. So instead of doing a lunge with my knee on the ground, the low crescent, I guess you call it, I always do a high crescent in all cases. And again, the crescent pose is more physically demanding than the low crescent or the low lunge or whatever with your knee on the ground. You're more stable, but again, you don't hurt your knee. But even with the crescent pose, you have to be somewhat careful depending upon how healthy your knee is, because if you are too spread out, you know, if your front leg and if your front foot and your rear foot are too far apart from each other, front to back, you could potentially put some strain on your knee doing this. So you could simply, depending upon where you're at, you could simply just, you know, adjust the distance between your front and back foot to be as close or far apart as, you know, you're comfortable. And the other thing is, the closer your 2 feet are to each other, the easier it is to balance, so the more stable you are. And the other thing is, the further apart the feet are side to side, so the wider your stance, the more stable you are. So you could experiment with the width of your stance and the length of your stance to achieve the right balance of stability and manageability in terms of your, you know, physical stamina and strength. So this is another variation. Runner's lunge, twist. So runner's lunge. So again, the runner's lunge will be the one where, let me do it this way, where I guess the other name is lizard pose, where your hands are actually inside your front foot. So again, instead of doing it with my knee down, I just simply do it with my knee up. So this is the lizard pose, or the runner's lunge. The other pose is the camel pose. So the camel pose, you're on your knees and you bend backwards. So this one here for me is, I just simply stand up and I'll do the camel pose standing up. Well, actually, so you just bend over. You get the same effect. I mean, the main aspect of this pose is to do a backward bend to open up your chest, and you could achieve that just as easily standing up as you could on your knees. The hero pose is another one when you're on your knees, and this one here is sort of a double whammy because you're over flexing your knees and you're on your knees. So this one here, again, I've seen the modification where you can put a block under your butt so you're not as far down. It doesn't really help me that much. So this one here, I simply avoid altogether. And instead of doing a hero pose, I'll tend to sit up on a block. And again, so I am super non-flexible, so I found this, I guess they call it the super block. I think it's 9 inches by 6 inches by, 12 inches or so. And so you could sit on whatever side you want. I actually tend to sit on the 9-inch. I tend to put it with the 9-inch side sort of going up and down. And so I could sit cross-legged like this comfortably. And this is my hero pose. So depending upon your flexibility level, you could use a regular block, you could use a super block and put it on either the shorter side or the taller side. Then there's Malasana, which normally looks like this. And here now, your knees aren't on the ground, but again, in my case, I'm very non-flexible, and you're really bending the heck out of your knees. And so this one here, I'll simply, in this modification, you'll see a lot in yoga videos and things. You just can put a block on the long, at least for me, on the long edge. I mean, with sitting upright with the taller, and I just do the Malasana like this. And then you'll come across other poses which I haven't covered. They're not, I guess there's a number of variations, and you'll be doing yoga videos where someone will do some sort of a pose that you've never seen before or whatever. And if it's on your knees, you'll have to be creative, and I'm sure you could modify it in such a way that you could do a standing up using a bench like this. So those are my tips for today. I hope they've been helpful to people. For anyone who might be having issues with your knees, and even if you don't have issues with your knees now, over time you may develop them, and this would be a way to potentially prevent them, while at the same time still being able to enjoy the whole experience of yoga. It certainly hasn't affected my ability to get the benefits out of it and to enjoy it to the same extent that I was able to enjoy it before I introduced these modifications. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.